No voiceover.
Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world, one book at a time. In this explainer, we're digging into David J. Silverman's book, This Land is Their Land. Now, this is a book that takes a hard look at the Thanksgiving story we all think we know, and it asks us to examine the very foundations of American history. All right, so let's just jump right in with a huge question. How are national identities actually built? I mean, we tend to think they just happen, right? That they grow organically from a history we all share. But what if that's not the whole story? What if they're more like a building, something carefully and intentionally constructed? And that's the core idea we're going to be working with today. Think of a national myth, like the Thanksgiving story, as the architectural foundation of a country. Its job is to provide stability. It holds up our big institutions. It's designed to distribute tension across the entire structure. But here's the catch. Just like a real foundation, it's very often built on contested ground. So let's dig in. We're going to unpack exactly how the Thanksgiving story serves as this kind of foundational system, one that's designed to stabilize a very particular version of a nation's origin. This quote from the book really nails it. The point of these stories, Silverman argues, is to uphold the social order. They teach that the people in charge got there heroically and righteously, maybe even with a little help from the divine. These aren't just feel-good tales. They're powerful tools. So here's the crucial point for this whole explainer. We are not just looking at a holiday, okay? We're looking at the Thanksgiving story as a system. It's a powerful mechanism, a piece of social machinery designed to do one thing. Take a long, messy, and often brutal history of conflict and shrink it down, compress it into a neat little story about cooperation. Now, before you can understand a building, you have to understand the ground it was built on. So let's explore the world of the Wampanoags, well before the English ever arrived. I love this quote. It just completely shatters that old myth of an empty, uncivilized wilderness, doesn't it? The reality was that this was a land governed by incredibly complex social and political rules. It wasn't an empty space at all. It was a managed landscape, a home, with a very deep history. And we're not talking about just a loose collection of tribes. The Wampanoags were organized into something called a paramount sachamship. Now, what does that mean? It was a really sophisticated political structure. Think of it like a network of local communities, all led by one powerful paramount sachem who handled things like foreign diplomacy, trade, and even warfare. And check this out. This engraving from 1619 is a perfect illustration. It shows a Wampanoag deer drive. I mean, just look at the coronation happening here. The structures they built. This isn't random. This is clear, visual proof of a highly organized society that knew how to manage their land and had been doing it for centuries. All right, so now the English arrive, and this is when the construction of that new foundation begins. But let's be clear, this was not a simple, friendly meeting of two cultures. This was the imposition of a brand new system, one designed specifically to displace the one that was already there. The context here is just absolutely staggering. Between 1616 and 1619, before the Pilgrims even set foot on shore, a plague introduced by Europeans, the Great Dying, wiped out up to 90% of the native population along the coast. 90%. So when the Mayflower landed in 1620, it wasn't in some pristine wilderness. It landed at Patuxet, a Wampanoag village that had been completely emptied by disease. It landed in a graveyard. And sadly, it was far from over. And this quote from John Winthrop, the governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, it's chilling. He saw the death of thousands not as a human tragedy, but as divine providence. He wrote that God was literally clearing our title to the land. This shows you the powerful ideological system that was at play, the one used to justify everything that was happening. So you might be wondering, how did this dispossession actually happen on the ground? Well, it was a system, a deliberate, multi-step system. First, you have the epidemics that catastrophically weaken Wampanoag society. Second, you have these completely lopsided land sales, where the English concept of owning land forever just steamrolls the Wampanoag custom of joint use. Third, the English use debt as a weapon, putting so much economic pressure on people that they're forced to sell land. And finally, number 4, they use their own court system to make it all legal, stripping away sovereignty and resources piece by piece. And this is so important to understand. The Wampanoag people didn't just lose their land like you might lose your keys. It was systematically taken. It was a deliberate process, a relentless assault using legal, economic, and demographic pressure. Okay, so if that's the brutal reality, then where in the world does our cozy Thanksgiving story come from? Well, this is where the myth that becomes the keystone in our architectural metaphor. It's the central stone that holds the entire simplified structure together. You can really see the two stories side by side here. On one hand, you have the classic, idealized painting of the first Thanksgiving. On the other, you have this plaque. It's for the National Day of Mourning, an annual protest started in 1970 by indigenous people to tell the other side of the story, one of genocide and stolen land. It's a powerful reminder of the history that gets erased. Silverman doesn't mince words. He says, the truth exposes the traditional tale of the first Thanksgiving as a myth rather than history, and so let us declare it dead. It's a bold statement. He's saying the story we've all been told simply isn't what happened. It's a myth, not history. So let's bring it all back to that architectural idea. The Thanksgiving myth is the keystone. It's the piece that locks everything together, holding up this simple, beautiful story of peaceful cooperation. And by doing that, it completely papers over a much more complex and violent history. Now, it's easy to think of this as just, ancient history. But that foundation that was laid centuries ago, it has enduring structural links. It's still holding things up and holding things back in our world right now. Just think about it for a second. Our modern property laws, how we define our national identity, the stories that our education systems choose to tell, even the way our economic development has played out. All of these things are directly, structurally linked back to that original foundation, to those colonial systems. And when we don't see those connections, when we look at these historical systems as if they're totally separate from our world today, that is what creates a crisis in perception. Which leaves us with a really important question, doesn't it? If the myth isn't really about who we were, but about how past generations wanted to see themselves, then what about us? Recognizing that gives us a choice. What story do we choose to build our future on right now? This project is free and publicly accessible. If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind Crisis in Perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon. For a longer, audio-based analysis of this topic, see the deep dive linked in the description. If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.